The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Sterling mansion, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Sterling stood in his home office, phone pressed to his ear, closing another multi-million-dollar deal. His voice was sharp and commanding as he discussed stock prices and merger agreements. Outside his office, the massive house remained eerily quiet despite housing over 15 staff members. In the East Wing, 12-year-old Daniel Sterling sat on the floor of his bedroom, arranging his toy cars in perfectly straight lines. Each car had to be exactly 2 inches apart. He measured the distance with a small ruler, adjusting and readjusting until everything was precise. The cars were organized by color, then by size within each color group. Red cars on the left, blue in the middle, yellow on the right. Always the same pattern, always the same order. Daniel's nanny, Mrs., knocked softly on the door before entering. She was the 4th nanny hired in the past 8 months. The previous 3 had all resigned, citing the position as too challenging. Mrs. carried a breakfast tray with toast cut into perfect squares and orange juice in a specific blue cup. Any other cup would result in Daniel refusing to eat for the entire day. She placed the tray on his desk and spoke in the rehearsed, careful tone she had developed. Daniel did not look up from his cars. His dark hair fell across his forehead as he continued his meticulous arrangement. Mrs. waited for a moment, then quietly left the room, pulling the door closed with barely a sound. Too much noise would upset the boy's routine. Finished his phone call and glanced at his watch. He had a board meeting in 40 minutes. His assistant had already prepared his briefcase and laid out the necessary documents. He walked through the hallway, his expensive leather shoes clicking against the floor. As he passed Daniel's room, he paused for just a second, his hand almost reaching for the door handle. But then his phone buzzed with another urgent message, and he continued walking. There would be time later. There was always supposed to be time later. Sterling family had not always been distant. Wife Caroline had died 3 years ago in a car accident. Before her death, she had been Daniel's primary caregiver, the one person who truly understood how to connect with him. She knew that he needed warnings before transitions, that sudden changes terrified him, that his behaviors were not defiance, but his way of making sense of a confusing world. When Caroline died, the carefully constructed understanding of Daniel's needs died with her. Had thrown himself into his work, building his technology empire into something even larger. He told himself he was securing Daniel's future, ensuring his son would never want for anything. But money could not replace presence. The business deals and corporate acquisitions became a shield against the grief he could not process and the son he did not know how to reach. Daniel's days followed an unchanging routine. He woke at 7 each morning, ate his breakfast alone, then spent 3 hours arranging his toys. Mrs. would attempt to guide him through basic lessons, reading and mathematics, but Daniel would often become fixated on a single detail and ignore everything else. If a page in his book was folded or marked, he could not continue until it was fixed. If a pencil was not sharpened to the correct point, he would not write. The other staff members whispered about Daniel in the kitchen and service corridors. They called him strange and difficult. Some were sympathetic, recognizing that the boy had challenges beyond his control. Others were less kind, viewing him as spoiled and impossible. None of them truly understood autism, and none had been properly trained to support a child with Daniel's specific needs. Had hired specialists over the years. Behavioral therapists came and went, each promising breakthroughs that never materialized. The problem was not their expertise, but the inconsistency. Was never present for the sessions, never implemented strategies at home, never created the structured environment these professionals recommended. Daniel needed routine and understanding, but he received only expensive interventions without follow-through. On Thursday afternoon, Mrs. gave her notice. She apologized profusely, explaining that she had accepted a position with another family. Listened to her resignation with barely concealed frustration. Another nanny leaving. Another disruption to whatever fragile stability Daniel had managed to establish. He authorized a generous severance package and told his assistant to begin the search for a replacement immediately. The assistant posted the position on several employment websites, emphasizing the generous salary and benefits. What the posting did not mention was the emotional toll, the patience required, or the specialized skills needed. It described the role as a standard nanny position for a 12-year-old boy in a wealthy household. Within days, applications flooded in from candidates attracted by the pay. Maria Santos saw the posting on a Wednesday evening. She sat in her small apartment, the walls thin enough to hear her neighbor's television through the plaster. Her savings account had dwindled to almost nothing after sending money home to her mother in another state. Her previous employer had let her go when they moved overseas, and she had been searching for steady work for 2 months. The salary listed in the posting was more than Maria had ever earned. It would allow her to pay her rent on time, send money to her mother for medical bills, and maybe even save a small amount for emergencies. She had worked as a cleaner and caregiver for various families over the past decade, but never in a home as grand as the Sterling mansion promised to be. Maria crafted her application carefully, emphasizing her reliability and experience with children. She did not have formal education beyond high school, and her references were from modest households, but she wrote honestly about her commitment and her patience. She mentioned that she had cared for her younger brother, who had learning difficulties, and that she understood children sometimes needed extra support and understanding. The interview was scheduled for the following Monday. Maria borrowed a professional outfit from her friend and took 2 buses to reach the Sterling estate. The mansion's gates were intimidating, all wrought iron and security cameras. The driveway seemed to stretch forever, lined with manicured hedges and expensive landscaping. Maria clutched her small purse and tried to calm her nerves. Assistant Jennifer conducted the interview in a formal sitting room. The furniture looked too expensive to actually sit on. Jennifer asked standard questions about experience, availability, and expectations. Maria answered honestly, perhaps too honestly, admitting that she had never worked in such a large household before. She worried that her candor would cost her the position. What Maria did not know was that, by this point, Jennifer was desperate. 6 other candidates had already been interviewed and rejected. Some lacked the necessary experience, others wanted salaries even higher than what was offered, and one had been openly dismissive when informed the child had special needs. Maria's genuine warmth and her story about caring for her brother stood out. Jennifer decided to arrange a trial period. Maria started the following week. Her first day began at 7 in the morning. The head housekeeper, Mrs., gave her a brief tour of the mansion, pointing out which rooms were off-limits and which areas were Maria's responsibility. Everything was overwhelming in its scale and luxury. Maria had cleaned wealthy homes before, but nothing compared to this. Mrs. led Maria to Daniel's wing of the house. She knocked twice, then opened the door. Daniel was already awake, sitting on his floor with his toy cars arranged in their usual pattern. He did not look up when Maria entered. Mrs. introduced Maria quickly, then left, saying she had other duties to attend to. Maria stood in the doorway, uncertain. She had expected to meet the boy's father first to receive instructions and guidance. Instead, she was alone with a child she knew nothing about. Daniel continued arranging his cars, moving them tiny increments, his face intense with concentration. She took a careful step into the room. Daniel's head snapped up, and for the first time Maria saw his face clearly. He had his father's dark eyes but softer features. There was intelligence in his gaze, but also something guarded and afraid. He stared at Maria for a long moment, then returned to his cars without acknowledging her further. Maria noticed the breakfast tray on the desk, the food untouched and growing cold. She approached slowly, speaking in a soft voice. She introduced herself, saying her name and that she would be helping take care of him. Daniel did not respond. Maria looked at the cold toast and decided to take the tray back to the kitchen to get him something fresh. When she returned with a new tray, carefully arranging everything exactly as she had found it before, Daniel was still on the floor. She placed the tray on the desk and sat down in a chair across the room. She did not try to force conversation or interaction. She simply sat quietly, allowing Daniel to become accustomed to her presence. This became Maria's approach over the following days. She learned through observation. She noticed that Daniel became agitated if his routine was disrupted, if items in his room were moved, or if there were unexpected noises. She saw that he avoided eye contact and did not respond to direct questions, but he was not ignoring people entirely. He was processing the world differently. Maria began to research autism late at night in her apartment, reading articles on her phone and watching videos about how to support autistic children. She learned about sensory sensitivities, the importance of routine, and the need for clear, concrete communication. She realized that much of what the other staff viewed as difficult behavior was actually Daniel's way of coping with a world that felt chaotic and overwhelming. She started implementing small changes. She began announcing her presence before entering Daniel's room, giving him time to prepare for the interruption. She learned which sounds bothered him and tried to minimize them. She discovered that he would eat more readily if his food was arranged in specific ways, and she made sure to prepare his meals with care and consistency. Remained largely absent. He left early for his office and returned late in the evening, often after Daniel was already in bed. On the rare occasions when their paths crossed, would ask brief questions about his son's day, but he never waited long enough for detailed answers. Maria wanted to tell him so many things about Daniel, about the small progresses and the challenges, but there was never an opportunity. 3 weeks into her employment, Maria witnessed Daniel's first major meltdown. It began when a gardener started using a loud leaf blower outside Daniel's window. The noise was sudden and piercing. Daniel dropped the book he had been holding and covered his ears, his face contorting in distress. He began rocking back and forth, making a low, humming sound that grew louder. Maria quickly moved to the window and closed it, then pulled the curtains to muffle the sound. But the damage was done. Daniel was overwhelmed, his nervous system flooded with distress. Maria knelt nearby, not touching him but speaking in a calm, steady voice. She told him that she understood the noise was scary, that it would stop soon, that he was safe. The meltdown lasted 20 minutes. Other staff members peered in, some offering unhelpful suggestions, others simply staring. Maria waved them away and focused entirely on Daniel. Gradually, his rocking slowed. The humming quieted. He kept his hands over his ears, but his breathing became more regular. Maria continued speaking softly, narrating what was happening and assuring him of his safety. When Daniel finally lowered his hands, he looked exhausted. Maria offered him his weighted blanket, something she had noticed he often held when stressed. He took it and wrapped it around his shoulders, the deep pressure providing comfort. Maria sat with him in silence for another 30 minutes until he seemed fully calm again. That evening, Maria mentioned the incident to Mrs., suggesting that they might want to inform the gardening staff about Daniel's sensitivity to sudden loud noises. Mrs. listened politely but dismissed the concern, saying that the gardeners had their schedules and the household could not revolve around one child's preferences. Maria felt frustration building but held her tongue. She was still new and did not want to overstep. As weeks turned into months, Maria and Daniel developed an unspoken understanding. She learned to read his subtle cues, recognizing when he was becoming overwhelmed before it escalated to a meltdown. She discovered that he loved puzzles and could complete complex ones with remarkable speed. She found that he responded better to visual schedules than verbal instructions, so she created simple picture cards showing his daily routine. Daniel began to tolerate Maria's presence more comfortably. He would occasionally glance at her when she spoke. Once, when she was arranging his lunch, he pushed one of his toy cars slightly in her direction. It was a tiny gesture, barely noticeable, but Maria recognized it as significant. It was the first time Daniel had initiated any form of interaction. Remained oblivious to these developments. His company was in the midst of a major acquisition, and he spent even longer hours at the office. On the rare Sunday when he stayed home, he would observe Daniel from a distance, a look of confusion and sadness on his face. He did not know how to bridge the gap between them, and his discomfort made him retreat further into work. The other staff members began to notice changes in Daniel. The meltdowns became less frequent. He seemed calmer, more settled. Some credited Maria's patience, while others remained skeptical, believing Daniel was simply having a good period. Maria did not seek recognition. She was focused entirely on the boys. One afternoon, Maria was reading to Daniel from a book about trains. He loved trains, loved their predictability and order. She noticed he was actually listening, his eyes following the pictures even if he did and the word Daniel had spoken stayed with Maria for days. She did not announce it to the household or make a spectacle of the moment. She understood instinctively that progress for Daniel would be quiet and gradual, built on trust and consistency rather than pressure and expectation. She continued her patient approach, reading to him daily, always stopping when he seemed tired or overwhelmed, always respecting his need for space. Learned of the development secondhand. Mrs. mentioned it casually one evening as she updated him on household matters. She said the new nanny claimed the boy had spoken, though she seemed doubtful. Felt a flicker of something he could not quite name. Hope, perhaps, mixed with guilt. His son had spoken, and he had not been there to witness it. He had not created the environment where such a breakthrough could happen. That night stood outside Daniel's bedroom door, his hand raised to knock. He could hear Maria inside, her voice soft as she spoke to Daniel about something inconsequential. Stood frozen, unable to bring himself to enter. What would he say? How would he explain his absence, his failures as a father? After several minutes, he lowered his hand and walked away, the familiar weight of inadequacy settling over him. Maria began introducing new activities carefully, always within the structure Daniel needed. She discovered he had an extraordinary memory for details. He could recall the exact placement of every toy in his room, could recite information from books after hearing them only once. His intelligence was remarkable, but it had been overlooked because it did not manifest in conventional ways. She started creating learning opportunities disguised as play. When Daniel arranged his cars, Maria would sit nearby and casually mention colors, numbers, patterns. She never demanded his attention or tested him, but she offered information gently, letting him absorb it at his own pace. Daniel began to show interest, sometimes rearranging his toys based on the concepts Maria introduced. The household staff remained divided in their opinions of Maria. Some, like the cook Mrs., appreciated Maria's dedication and had begun adjusting meal preparations to accommodate Daniel's preferences without complaint. Others, particularly the head butler Mr. Harrison, viewed Maria as overstepping her role. She was just a nanny, he reminded other staff members, not a therapist or teacher. She should maintain boundaries. Maria paid little attention to the politics. Her focus remained entirely on Daniel. She noticed he became distressed during thunderstorms, the unpredictable lightning and thunder overwhelming his senses. During the next storm, she prepared his room in advance, closing curtains, playing soft music to mask the noise, and staying nearby with his weighted blanket ready. When the storm hit, Daniel was anxious but not in full meltdown. Maria's preparation had made the experience manageable. His business acquisition was nearing completion. The deal would make him one of the wealthiest men in the state, cementing his reputation as a brilliant entrepreneur. Yet as he sat in boardrooms negotiating final terms, he felt increasingly hollow. His colleagues congratulated him on his success, but success felt meaningless when he could not connect with his own son. Jennifer, his assistant, noticed the change in. He had always been driven and focused, but lately there was a distraction, a sadness that had not been present before. One afternoon, she gently suggested he take some time off after the acquisition closed, perhaps spend it at home with Daniel. Agreed absently, though both of them doubted he would follow through. Maria celebrated 4 months working for the Sterling family in quiet solitude. She treated herself to a nice dinner at a small restaurant, reflecting on the progress Daniel had made. He now spoke occasional single words, always in context and meaningful. He had begun to tolerate very brief periods of gentle physical contact, like Maria guiding his hand during activities. He smiled sometimes, small fleeting expressions when something pleased him. The breakthrough that would change everything came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Maria had been reading Daniel a book about space, showing him pictures of planets and stars. Daniel was clearly engaged, his eyes fixed on the illustrations. When Maria finished, she closed the book and stood to leave, giving Daniel his usual quiet time alone. Daniel looked up at her directly, making eye contact for the first time in their months together. Then he spoke, not a single word but a complete sentence. He said, "Maria, stay, read more planets." His voice was clear and deliberate. Maria felt tears spring to her eyes, but she blinked them back, keeping her expression calm and warm. She sat back down and picked up the book, continuing where she had left off. This time, Maria could not keep the news to herself. When returned home that evening, she was waiting in the main hallway. She approached him respectfully, asking for a moment of his time. Tired from another long day, almost brushed her off, but something in her expression made him pause. Maria told him about Daniel's sentence, about the eye contact and the clear communication. She spoke quickly, worried would dismiss her before she finished, but stood completely still, absorbing every word. When Maria finished, he asked her to repeat exactly what Daniel had said. She did, and felt something crack inside his chest, some wall he had built around his emotions. Asked if Daniel might speak again, Maria answered honestly. She said she did not know that Daniel communicated when he felt safe and understood, but that forcing or expecting it could cause him to withdraw. Nodded, processing this information. For the first time, he asked Maria detailed questions about his son. He wanted to know everything, Daniel's routines, his preferences, his challenges, his strengths. They talked for over an hour. Maria shared observations and insights she had accumulated over months of careful attention. She explained about sensory sensitivities, about the importance of routine, about how Daniel's behaviors were not defiance but communication. Listened with growing shame and realization. He had been living in the same house as his son, but had known nothing about him. That night did something he had not done in years. He knocked gently on Daniel's door and entered when there was no response. Daniel was arranging his toy cars in their evening pattern. A ritual Maria had explained helped him transition to bedtime. Stood awkwardly in the doorway, unsure of what to do. Daniel glanced at him briefly, then returned to his cars, took this as permission to stay. He moved to a chair and sat down, simply watching his son work. He did not try to speak or interact. He just sat there, present and quiet. After 20 minutes, said goodnight softly and left. It was a small moment, but it was a beginning. Maria noticed the shift immediately, started coming home earlier. He would ask her about Daniel's day, taking notes on his phone as she explained routines and strategies. He began reading books about autism late at night, trying to educate himself on what he had been ignorant of for too long. The change was not dramatic, but it was genuine. Arranged a meeting with a highly recommended developmental specialist, Dr. Sarah. Unlike previous therapists who had been hired and then ignored, was fully present for this meeting. He asked detailed questions and listened carefully to doctor's assessment and recommendations. She praised much of what Maria had been doing intuitively and suggested building on that foundation with more structured support. Doctor proposed a comprehensive plan involving occupational therapy for sensory issues, speech therapy to encourage communication, and parent training so could learn to support Daniel effectively. The cost was substantial, but did not hesitate. Money was something he had. What he had been lacking was understanding and commitment. The implementation began slowly. Maria coordinated with the various therapists, ensuring consistency between their work and Daniel's home routines. Cleared his schedule to attend the parent training sessions, something that shocked Jennifer and his business partners. The man who had never missed a board meeting was now leaving early twice a week to learn about supporting his son. The other staff members watched these developments with mixed reactions. Some were genuinely pleased, hoping that increased involvement would benefit Daniel. Others were cynical, predicting he would lose interest once the novelty wore off. Mr. Harrison made a snide comment about wealthy people playing at being parents when it suited them. Maria ignored him, focused on the positive changes she was witnessing. Daniel's progress was not linear. There were difficult days when he regressed, when sensory overload or changes in routine triggered meltdowns. But the family was better equipped to handle these moments now. Learned techniques to help Daniel calm down, ways to anticipate and prevent overwhelming situations. He was not always successful, but he was trying, and Daniel seemed to sense the difference. One Saturday morning, woke early and went to Daniel's room. Maria had the day off and wanted to try managing the morning routine himself. He had watched Maria do it countless times and had practiced the steps with her guidance. He knocked, announced himself, and entered. Daniel was already awake, beginning his morning toy arrangement. Prepared breakfast exactly as Maria had taught him, the right cup, the right arrangement of food on the plate. He brought it to Daniel's room and placed it on the desk. Then he sat in the chair Maria usually occupied and simply waited. Daniel completed his toy arrangement, then moved to the desk. He ate his breakfast slowly and remained quiet, not pushing for conversation or interaction. As Daniel finished eating, he looked over at. For a moment their eyes met and saw something he had not seen before. Recognition, perhaps, connection. Daniel did not speak, but he pushed one of his toy cars slightly toward, the same gesture Maria had described from months ago. Felt his throat tighten with emotion. He carefully picked up the car, examined it, and placed it gently back near Daniel, respecting the gesture without overwhelming the moment. Maria returned Monday to find in better spirits than she had ever seen him. He told her about the Saturday morning, about the small gesture Daniel had made. Maria smiled, genuinely happy for both of them. She had never sought to replace in Daniel's life, only to build a bridge between them. Seeing that bridge beginning to form was more rewarding than any salary. The weeks that followed brought more changes. Began eating dinner at home regularly, something he had not done since Caroline's death. The meals were quiet, with Daniel still requiring his specific foods and arrangements, but they were together. Would talk softly about his day, not expecting Daniel to respond, but including him in the conversation nonetheless. Daniel's vocabulary expanded gradually. He began using 2- and 3-word phrases more regularly. He would request specific foods, ask for books, indicate when he wanted to be alone. The communication was still limited compared to typical 12-year-olds, but it was meaningful and growing. Doctor was pleased with his progress and encouraged continued consistency. Made a decision that surprised everyone. He promoted Jennifer to Chief Operating Officer, giving her authority to handle day-to-day business operations. He reduced his own schedule, creating space to be more present at home. His business partners questioned this choice, suggesting he was losing focus at a critical time. Disagreed. He had been losing focus for years, just not on the things that mattered. The media noticed reduced public presence. Business magazines ran speculative articles about whether he was planning to sell his company or step back from leadership. Some competitors saw opportunity in what they perceived as weakness, ignored the noise. He had spent years building an empire while losing his son. The empire could wait. Maria witnessed all of this with quiet satisfaction. She had not set out to transform the Sterling household, had only wanted to help a struggling child. But in helping Daniel, she had inadvertently helped rediscover fatherhood. The changes were not perfect or complete, but they were real and meaningful. One afternoon, Maria was teaching Daniel about different textures, a sensory activity recommended by his occupational therapist. She had gathered various fabrics and materials for him to touch and explore. Daniel was initially hesitant, but with gentle encouragement, he began to engage with the activity. Watched from the doorway, marveling at Maria's patience and intuition. He realized that she had given his family something priceless, something no amount of money could buy. She had given them hope and connection. She had seen Daniel not as broken or difficult, but as a unique individual deserving of understanding and respect. As the months progressed, Daniel's world expanded slightly. He began tolerating short trips outside the house with proper preparation and support. Maria would take him to quiet parks during off-peak hours, allowing him to experience new environments without overwhelming stimulation. These outings were exhausting for Daniel, but they were also enriching, giving him carefully managed exposure to the broader world. The Sterling household had transformed in subtle but significant ways. The staff had received training on autism awareness, learning to accommodate Daniel's needs without complaint. The loud gardening equipment was scheduled during times when Daniel was in therapy sessions away from home. The lighting in common areas had been adjusted to reduce harsh glare that bothered him. The entire environment had been modified to be more welcoming and less stressful. Daniel's relationship with his father was still developing, still fragile and uncertain. There were moments of real connection interspersed with periods of distance and confusion, but no longer avoided his son. He no longer hid behind work and wealth. He was present, learning, trying. For Daniel, who had spent years essentially alone despite being surrounded by people, this presence was transformative. The autumn air brought changes to the Sterling estate. The trees that lined the driveway turned brilliant shades of orange and gold, and the gardens transformed with seasonal flowers. Inside the mansion, deeper changes were taking root, ones that would define the family's future in ways no one could have predicted when Maria first arrived. Daniel had now been working with his team of therapists for 6 months. His progress was documented in detailed reports that read meticulously. The occupational therapist noted improvements in sensory regulation. The speech therapist reported increasing verbal communication and better social reciprocity. Most importantly, Doctor observed that Daniel seemed happier, more engaged with his environment and the people in it. Had become something of an expert on autism through his intensive self-education. His home office, once filled only with business documents and financial reports, now contained stacks of books on neurodiversity, child development, and therapeutic approaches. He attended support groups for parents of autistic children, sitting in community centers alongside families from all economic backgrounds, united by shared experiences rather than divided by wealth. At one of these support groups, met other fathers who had struggled with similar feelings of inadequacy and loss. They shared stories of missed connections and gradual healing. One man, a construction worker named Pete, talked about his teenage son who had taught himself to code despite severe communication challenges. Another father, a teacher, described how his daughter's autism had taught him patience he never knew he possessed. These conversations humbled in ways his business achievements never had. He realized that his wealth had been both a blessing and a curse. It had provided access to the best therapists and resources, but it had also allowed him to hide from the real work of being a father. He could not buy connection or understanding. Those things required time, patience, and vulnerability, resources he had himself and his son. Maria noticed transformation extended beyond his relationship with Daniel. He treated the household staff with more respect and consideration. He learned their names, asked about their families, acknowledged their contributions. The man who had once barely registered the existence of the people who maintained his home now understood that every person had value and dignity regardless of their position. Mr. Harrison, the butler who had been skeptical of Maria from the beginning, found his own attitudes challenged. He watched, a billionaire, humbly learning from a woman with no formal education, valuing her insights above those of expensive consultants. It forced Harrison to reconsider his own prejudices about class and worth. He began treating Maria with genuine respect rather than barely concealed condescension. Daniel's 13th birthday approached and wanted to make it special. In previous years, birthdays had been grand affairs with expensive gifts that Daniel ignored and parties he could not attend due to sensory overload. This year would be different. Consulted with Maria, doctor, and Daniel's therapists to plan a celebration that would actually be enjoyable for his son. They decided on a quiet afternoon at home with just a few people present. Mrs. prepared Daniel's favorite foods, arranged exactly as he preferred. Maria decorated one room with blue streamers, Daniel's favorite color, but kept the decorations minimal to avoid visual overwhelm. Purchased a gift he hoped would be meaningful, a detailed model train set that Daniel could assemble and arrange to his heart's content. The birthday celebration was simple but perfect. Daniel seemed to understand it was a special day, even if he could not articulate why it felt different. He smiled when he saw the blue decorations, a genuine expression of pleasure. When presented the train set, Daniel's eyes widened, and he immediately sat down to examine all the pieces, sorting them by size and type. Sat beside his son, helping to assemble the tracks according to the instructions. They worked together in comfortable silence, the only sounds the soft clicking of pieces connecting and Maria's gentle humming as she prepared the birthday cake. It was not the extravagant party other wealthy families might have thrown, but it was real and true and filled with love. As Daniel placed the final piece of track and watched the train complete its first circuit, he looked up at. Then, in a moment that would remain forever etched in his memory, Daniel spoke a full sentence unprompted. He said, "Thank you, Dad, I like the trains." 4 simple words that contained universes of meaning. Felt tears stream down his face, making no effort to hide them. Maria, watching from across the room, pressed her hand to her heart. Even Mr. Harrison, who had come to deliver refreshments, paused in the doorway, witnessing something profound and sacred. Daniel had not only spoken, but had used the word Dad, claiming the relationship in his own voice and his own time. The celebration continued with cake, which Daniel ate despite it not being one of his regular approved foods. The newness of the situation, the positive emotions, seemed to give him flexibility he typically did not possess. It was a reminder that progress was not always linear or predictable, that breakthrough moments could arrive unexpectedly. That evening, after Daniel had gone to bed, sought out Maria. He found her in the kitchen, helping Mrs. clean up, asked if they could speak privately. In his study, surrounded by the business trophies that once defined his entire identity, struggled to find words adequate to express his gratitude. He told Maria that she had saved his son's life, and in doing so, had saved his own. He admitted that before she arrived, he had been lost in grief and guilt, building walls of wealth and work to avoid facing his failures as a father. Maria had torn down those walls with simple kindness and unwavering dedication. She had seen value in Daniel when others, including his own father, had only seen difficulty. Maria listened quietly, then spoke with characteristic humility. She told that she had not done anything extraordinary, had only treated Daniel with the respect and understanding every child deserves. She said that had done the hard work of changing himself, of choosing to be present and learning to be the father Daniel needed. The transformation had been his to make. But disagreed. He insisted that without Maria's initial intervention, without her patience and insight, he might never have found the path back to his son. She had been the catalyst, the person who believed change was possible when everyone else had given up. That was a gift beyond price. Made a proposal. He wanted to establish a foundation dedicated to supporting families with autistic children, particularly families who lacked the resources he had taken for granted. He asked Maria to help him design programs that would be actually useful rather than performative charity. He wanted to create support systems, train caregivers, fund research, and advocate for better understanding of neurodiversity. Maria was overwhelmed by the scope of his vision but agreed to help. Together, they began sketching out ideas: respite care for exhausted parents, training programs for caregivers and educators, sensory-friendly community spaces, scholarships for therapies that insurance would not cover, employment programs for autistic adults. The foundation would be called Caroline's Hope, honoring Daniel's mother and the love she had shown him. The announcement of the foundation generated significant media attention. Business journalists who had speculated about its retreat from public life now understood it had been a strategic redirection rather than a decline. His focus had shifted from personal wealth accumulation to meaningful social impact. Some of his business associates were skeptical, viewing it as a vanity project, but those who knew well recognized it as genuine transformation. Maria became the foundation's Director of Family Services, a title that felt surreal given her humble background. She insisted on remaining Daniel's primary caregiver, refusing to let her new responsibilities interfere with that relationship. The foundation hired additional staff to handle administrative duties while Maria focused on program design and family support. The first families served by Caroline's Hope came from all backgrounds. There were single mothers working multiple jobs to afford therapy, immigrant families navigating systems in languages they barely spoke, foster families caring for autistic children with complex trauma histories. Each family received customized support based on their specific needs and circumstances. Maria met with these families personally, listening to their stories and challenges. She recognized herself in many of them, people trying their best with limited resources and little support. The foundation provided not just financial assistance, but also training, emotional support, and community connection. Maria ensured that every family was treated with dignity, that their knowledge of their own children was respected and valued. Daniel's development continued, though not always smoothly. He entered his teenage years with all the complexity that entailed, complicated further by his autism. There were new challenges around puberty, social expectations, and increasing awareness of his own differences. But he faced these challenges with a support system that had not existed before. Had learned that being Daniel's father meant constant adaptation and learning. Just when he thought he understood his son, new developmental stages brought new puzzles to solve. But he no longer faced these challenges alone or from a distance. He was fully engaged, working closely with Maria and the therapeutic team to support Daniel through each transition. Daniel began attending a specialized school that used evidence-based approaches for autistic students. The school environment was designed to minimize sensory overwhelm while providing rigorous academics. Daniel thrived there, his remarkable memory and pattern recognition abilities finally recognized as strengths rather than oddities. He made his first friend, another autistic boy named Alex who shared his fascination with trains. Watching Daniel interact with Alex felt both joy and grief. Joy at seeing his son experience friendship, something he had feared might never happen. Grief for all the years Daniel had been isolated, his potential for connection unrealized because the adults around him had not understood how to facilitate it. Could not change the past, but he could ensure the present and future were different. The foundation expanded beyond its initial vision. Other wealthy families, inspired by his example, contributed significant donations. But what made Caroline's Hope truly special was that it centered the voices of autistic people themselves. The foundation hired autistic adults as consultants and staff members, ensuring that programs were designed by and for the community they served rather than imposed from outside. One of these consultants, a woman named Jessica who was completing her D in neuroscience, became a mentor to Daniel. She was someone who could relate to his experiences from the inside, who understood sensory sensitivities and communication differences not theoretically, but personally. Jessica helped Daniel begin to understand his own neurology, to see his autism not as something wrong with him, but as a different way of experiencing and processing the world. Through Jessica, Daniel learned about autistic culture and community. He discovered that there were other people like him, that his experiences were shared by millions of others, that he was not alone or broken. This knowledge was empowering, helping Daniel develop a sense of identity and pride that had been impossible when he viewed himself only through the lens of deficit and disorder. Learned alongside his son. He joined Jessica and Daniel for some of their mentoring sessions, listening as Jessica explained autistic perspectives on communication, social interaction, and sensory experiences. Realized how much of Daniel's early life had been shaped by trying to force him into neurotypical expectations rather than supporting his natural way of being. The household adapted further. Daniel's room was redesigned with input from occupational therapists and autistic consultants to be a true sensory haven. The lighting was adjustable, the furniture arranged to create both open spaces and cozy corners, the storage designed to support his need for organization and predictability. Every detail was considered with Daniel's as the priority. Maria watched all of this unfold with quiet satisfaction. She had never imagined her life would take this direction. She had come to the Sterling mansion desperate for employment, expecting to clean and cook and eventually move on to another position. Instead, she had become integral to a family's healing and the director of a foundation serving thousands of families. Her own mother's health had improved thanks to the medical care Maria could now afford. She had moved from her cramped apartment to a small but comfortable house. She could save money, help friends in need, and live without the constant financial anxiety that had defined most of her adult life. But material improvements, while meaningful, were not what made her happiest. What brought Maria joy was Daniel's progress and the knowledge that she had played a role in it. Watching him communicate more confidently, seeing him smile and even laugh occasionally, witnessing his relationship with deepen, these were the true rewards of her work. She had helped a lonely, misunderstood boy find his voice and his place in the world. On the Foundation's first anniversary, hosted a celebration at the mansion. Families served by Caroline's Hope were invited, along with staff, therapists, and community partners. The event was carefully planned to be sensory-friendly, with quiet spaces available and accommodations for various needs. It was a celebration that truly included everyone. Daniel attended, something that would have been impossible a year earlier. He stayed for only 30 minutes, needing to retreat to his room when the stimulation became too much, but those 30 minutes were significant. He stood with and Maria as his father gave a speech about the Foundation's work and thanked everyone involved. When the crowd, Daniel covered his ears against the noise, but he was smiling. In his speech, made a point of recognizing Maria publicly. He told the assembled crowd about her dedication, her intuition, and her unwavering belief in Daniel when others had given up. He said that the Foundation existed because Maria had shown him what was possible when people were treated with genuine care and respect. She had been Daniel's first advocate and remained his most devoted supporter. Maria felt embarrassed by the attention but accepted it gracefully. She knew meant every word, but she also knew that the real heroes were the families fighting every day for their autistic children, often with far fewer resources than the Sterlings had. She had been fortunate to be in the right place at the right time with the right instincts. Countless other caregivers did similar work in obscurity, loving and supporting autistic individuals without recognition or adequate support. As the celebration wound down and families began departing, Maria stood with watching Daniel through the window of his room. He was arranging his model trains, the birthday gift that had sparked such a meaningful moment months earlier. The trains circled their tracks in predictable patterns, bringing Daniel the comfort and joy that came from order and routine. Reflected on how much had changed. A year ago, he had been a man lost in grief and guilt, disconnected from his son and from himself. His wealth had meant nothing because he was using it to build walls rather than bridges. Maria had arrived with nothing but compassion and common sense, and she had transformed everything. He turned to Maria and said something he had said many times but never felt was adequate. He thanked her again for seeing Daniel, truly seeing him, when everyone else, including himself, had been blind. Maria smiled and replied that Daniel had always been worth seeing, worth knowing, worth loving. He just needed people willing to learn his language rather than forcing him to speak theirs. They stood together in comfortable silence, two people from vastly different worlds who had been brought together by a lonely boy's need. Their partnership had created ripples extending far beyond the Sterling mansion, touching thousands of families through Caroline's Hope. But at its core, their achievement was simple and profound. They had helped a child who had been overlooked and dismissed find connection, communication, and belonging. Daniel looked up from his trains and saw them watching. He waved, a gesture he had learned to use appropriately through years of patient teaching, and Maria waved back. In that simple exchange was everything that mattered: recognition, connection, love. The building blocks of family and community that no amount of money could buy, but that compassion and commitment could create. The future remained uncertain. Daniel would face ongoing challenges as he navigated adolescence and eventually adulthood in a world not designed for minds like his. But he would not face those challenges alone or unsupported. He had a father who had learned to truly be present, a caregiver who understood and valued him, a team of professionals who saw his potential, and a growing community of people who recognized neurodiversity as natural human variation rather than defect. Had learned the most important lesson of his life from the least likely teacher. He had learned that success was not measured in stock prices or business acquisitions or net worth. Real success was measured in relationships, in understanding, in the ability to see and value people as they truly were rather than as you wished them to be. He had spent decades accumulating wealth while impoverished in the things that actually mattered. Maria had taught him without intending to teach, simply by being herself. She had shown up with an open heart and patient spirit, treating a struggling boy with the dignity every human deserves. In doing so, she had sparked transformation not just in Daniel, but in the household staff, in the broader community through the Foundation's work. One person's compassion had created waves of change. As night fell over the Sterling estate, lights glowed warmly from the mansion's windows. Inside, Daniel continued playing with his trains, caught up on Foundation correspondence, and Maria prepared for the next day's family visits. It was an ordinary evening in an extraordinary place, a home that had been transformed from a monument to wealth and grief into a true family home. The story of the billionaire and the poor maid who changed his son's life was really a story about human connection across divides of class and circumstance. It was about the power of seeing people clearly, treating them with respect, and believing in their potential when others had given up. Most of all, it was about a boy who had always been worth knowing, who had simply needed the right people to take the time to understand him. Daniel would continue growing and developing, facing challenges and achieving victories large and small. His autism would always be part of who he was, shaping how he experienced the world. But it would no longer be a source of isolation and misunderstanding. He had been overlooked for too long, dismissed as difficult or broken. Maria had changed that narrative and had learned to continue her work. The Sterling mansion stood as before, grand and imposing on its manicured grounds. But everything that truly mattered had changed within its walls. Where there had been loneliness, there was now connection. Where there had been misunderstanding, there was now compassion. Where there had been a father and son separated by grief and confusion, there was now a family learning to love and understand each other. Maria lay in bed that night, reflecting on the improbable journey that had brought her here. She had come seeking only a job, a way to pay rent and support her family. She had found instead a calling, a purpose larger than herself. She had discovered that her years of quiet caregiving experience, her instinct for understanding others, and her capacity for patience were not just survival skills, but gifts that could transform lives. The Foundation would continue growing, helping more families, changing more lives. Daniel would continue developing, surprising everyone with his hidden depths and capabilities. Would continue learning to be the father his son needed, making up for lost time with present-moment dedication. And Maria would continue being the heart of it all, the person who had seen possibility where others saw only problems. As she drifted off to sleep, Maria thought about Daniel's words on his birthday. "Thank you, Dad, I like the trains." Such a simple sentence, but one that represented years of patient work and unconditional love. In those few words was proof that connection was always possible, that people could change and grow, that overlooked children could find their voices when given the right support. The next morning would bring new challenges and new joys. There would be difficult moments and breakthrough moments, setbacks and progress. But whatever came, the Sterling family would face it together, bound not by obligation or proximity, but by genuine care and understanding. They had learned through struggle and grace what it meant to be a family, and it all began with a poor maid who saw a lonely boy and decided he deserved to be truly seen. Maria knew her role would eventually evolve. Daniel was growing and his needs were changing. But for now, she remained his constant, the person who had first seen him clearly and loved him unconditionally. She had come to the Sterling mansion looking for a job, expecting to clean and cook and provide basic. Instead, she had become the catalyst for healing a broken family, proving that sometimes the most overlooked people have the power to change everything looked directly at her. She reached the end of a chapter and paused. Then, barely above a whisper, Daniel spoke. He said the word more, his voice rusty from disuse. Maria's heart leaped, but she kept her reaction calm and gentle. She simply turned the page and continued reading, honoring his request.